let's have a little more daylight. Why not? Why not use it? Not many will watch this. Only very few people will ever watch this. But this is not why I do this. I just like to read this. I cannot remember. There's too many names and numbers. I cannot read. I have to read it again in the future. But I like to read it anyway.
He wished. Stone argued this insecurity in land tenure strongly discouraged Timurians from seeking long-term development of their land, and instead led them to adopt a strategy of short-term exploitation, which had deleterious effects on the Ottoman economy. 174. Government. Topkapı Palace and Dolmabahce Palace were the primary residences of the Ottoman sultans in Istanbul between 1465 and 1856, 175, and 1856 to 1922, 176, respectively. Before the reforms of the 19th and 20th centuries, the state organization of the Ottoman Empire was a system with two main dimensions: the military administration, and the civil administration. The Sultan was in the highest position in the system. The civil system was based on local administrative units based on the region's characteristics. The state had control over the clergy. Certain pre-Islamic Turkish traditions that had survived the adoption of administrative and legal practices from Islamic Iran remained important in Ottoman administrative circles. 177. According to Ottoman understanding, the state's primary responsibility was to defend and extend the land of the Muslims and to ensure security and harmony within its borders in the overarching context of Orthodox Islamic practice and dynastic sovereignty. 178. Ambassadors at the Topkapı Palace. The Ottoman Empire, or as a dynastic institution, the House of Osman, was unprecedented and unequaled in the Islamic world for its size and duration. 179. In Europe, only the House of Habsburg had a similarly unbroken line of sovereigns, kings/emperors, from the same family who ruled for so long, and during the same period, between late 13th and early 20th centuries. The Ottoman dynasty was Turkish in origin. On 11 occasions, the Sultan was deposed, replaced by another Sultan of the Ottoman dynasty, who were either the former Sultan's brother, son or nephew, because he was perceived by his enemies as a threat to the state. There were only two attempts in Ottoman history to unseat the ruling Ottoman dynasty, both failures, which suggests a political system that for an extended period was able to manage its revolutions without unnecessary instability. 178. As such, the last Ottoman Sultan Mehmed VI, R1918-1922, was a direct patrilineal, male line, descendant of the first Ottoman Sultan Osman I, d. 132 3/4, which was unparalleled in both Europe. For example, the male line of the House of Habsburg became extinct in 1740, and in the Islamic world, the primary purpose of the imperial harem was to ensure the birth of male heirs to the Ottoman throne and secure the continuation of the direct patrilineal, male line, power of the Ottoman sultans in the future generations. The highest position in Islam, Caliph, was claimed by the sultans starting with Selim I, 16, which was established as the Ottoman Caliphate. The Ottoman Sultan, Padishah or Lord of Kings, served as PRP's sole regent and was considered to be the embodiment of its government, though he did not always exercise complete control. The imperial harem was one of the most important powers of the Ottoman court. It was ruled by the Valide Sultan. On occasion, the Valide Sultan became involved in state politics. For a time, the women of the harem effectively controlled the state in what was termed the Sultanate of Women. New sultans were always chosen from the sons of the previous sultan. The strong educational system of the palace school was geared towards eliminating the unfit potential heirs and establishing support among the ruling elite for a successor. The palace schools, which also educated the future administrators of state, were not a single track. First, the madrasa, Midas, was designated for the Muslims, and educated scholars and state officials according to Islamic tradition. The financial burden of the Midas was supported by vakifs, allowing children of poor families to move to higher social levels and income. 180. The second track was a free boarding school for the Christians. The Enderun, 181, which recruited 3,000 students annually from Christian boys between 8 and 20 years old from 1 in 40 families among communities settled in Rumelia or the Balkans, a process known as devshirme. 182. Though the Sultan was the supreme monarch, the Sultan's political and executive authority was delegated. The politics of the state had a number of advisors and ministers gathered around a council known as Divan. The Divan, in the years when the Ottoman state was still a beylik, was composed of the elders of the tribe. Its composition was later modified to include military officers and local elites, such as religious and political advisors. Later still, beginning in 1320, a Grand Vizier was appointed to assume certain of the Sultan's responsibilities. The Grand Vizier had considerable independence from the Sultan with almost unlimited powers of appointment, dismissal, and supervision. Beginning with the late 16th century, sultans withdrew from politics and the Grand Vizier became the de facto head of state. 183. Yusuf Ziya Pasha, Ottoman ambassador to the United States, in Washington, D.C., 1913. Throughout Ottoman history, there were many instances in which local governors acted independently, and even in opposition to the Ulema. After the Young Turk Revolution of 1908, the Ottoman state became a constitutional monarchy. The Sultan no longer had executive powers. A parliament was formed, with representative escosen from the provinces. The representatives formed the imperial government of the Ottoman Empire. This eclectic administration was apparent even in the diplomatic correspondence of the empire, which was initially undertaken in Greek language to the west. 184. The Tara were calligraphic monograms, or signatures, of the Ottoman sultans, of which there were 35. Carved on the Sultan's seal, they bore the names of the Sultan and his father. The statement and prayer, ever victorious, was also present in most. The earliest belonged to Orhan Gazi. The ornately stylized Tara spawned a branch of Ottoman Turkish calligraphy. Law. The Ottoman legal system accepted the religious law over its subjects. At the same time the Canon, or Canon, dynastic law, coexisted with religious law or Sharia. 185, 186. The Ottoman Empire was always organized around a system of local jurisprudence. Legal administration in the Ottoman Empire was part of a larger scheme of balancing central and local authority. 187. Ottoman power revolved crucially around the administration of the rights to land, which gave a space for the local authority to develop the needs of the local millet. 187. The jurisdictional complexity of the Ottoman Empire was aimed to permit the integration of culturally and religiously different groups. 187. The Ottoman system had 3 court systems, one for Muslims, one for non-Muslims, involving appointed Jews and Christians ruling over their respective religious communities, and the trade court. The entire system was regulated from above by means of the administrative canon, i.e., laws, a system based upon the Turkic Yasar and Tor, which were developed in the pre-Islamic era. 188, 189. These court categories were not, however, wholly exclusive. For instance, the Islamic courts, which were the empire's primary courts, could also be used to settle a trade conflict or disputes between litigants of differing religions, and Jews and Christians often went to them to obtain a more forceful ruling. On an issue. The Ottoman state tended not to interfere with non-Muslim religious law systems, despite legally having an Ottoman trial, 1877 voice to do so through local governors. The Islamic Sharia law system had been developed from a combination of the Quran, the Hadith, or words of the Prophet Muhammad, Ijma, or consensus of the members of the Muslim community, Shias, a system of analogical reasoning from earlier precedents, and local customs. Both systems were taught at the empire's law schools, which were in Istanbul and Bursa. An unhappy wife complaining to the Qadi about her husband's impotence, as depicted in an Ottoman miniature. Divorce is allowed in Islamic law and can be initiated by either the husband or the wife. 190. The Ottoman Islamic legal system was set up differently from traditional European courts. Presiding over Islamic courts was a Qadi, or judge. Since the closing of the Ijtihad, or gate of interpretation, Qadis throughout the Ottoman Empire focused less on legal precedent, and more with local customs and traditions in the areas that they administered. 187. However, the Ottoman court system lacked an appellate structure, leading to jurisdictional case strategies where plaintiffs could take their disputes from one court system to another until they achieved a ruling that was in their favor. In the late 19th century, the Ottoman legal system saw substantial reform. This process of legal modernization began with the Edict of Gulhan of 1839. 191. These reforms included the fair and public trial of all accused regardless of religion, the creation of a system of separate competences, religious and civil, and the validation of testimony on non-Muslims. 192. Specific land codes, 1858, civil codes, 1869, 1876, and a code of civil procedure also were enacted. 192. These reforms were based heavily on French models, as indicated by the adoption of a three-tier court system, referred to as Nizamiye. The system was extended to the local magistrate level with the final promulgation of the Misal, a civil code that regulated marriage, divorce, alimony, will, and other matters of personal status. 192. In an attempt to clarify the division of judicial competences, an administrative council laid down that religious matters were to be handled by religious courts, and statute matters were to be handled by the Nizamiye courts. 192. Military. Ottoman Separis in battle, holding the crescent banner, by Joseph Brandt. The first military unit of the Ottoman state was an army that was organized by Osmani from the tribesmen inhabiting the hills of western Anatolia in the late 13th century. The military system became an intricate organization with the advance of the empire. The Ottoman military was a complex system of recruiting and fief-holding. The main corps of the Ottoman army included Janissary Sipahi, Ankh and Meteran. The Ottoman army was once among the most advanced fighting forces in the world, being one of the first to use muskets and cannons. The Ottoman Turks began using falconets, which were short but wide cannons, during the siege of Constantinople. The Ottoman cavalry depended on high speed and mobility rather than heavy armor, using bows and short swords on fast Turkoman and Arabian horses, progenitors of the thoroughbred racing horse. 193, 194, and often applied tactics similar to those of the Mongol Empire, such as pretending to retreat while surrounding the enemy forces inside a crescent-shaped formation and then making the real attack. The Ottoman army continued to be an effective fighting force throughout the 17th and early 18th centuries, 195, 196, falling behind the empire's European rivals only during a long period of peace from 1740 to 1768. 61. Modernized Ertugrul Cavalry Regiment crossing the Galata Bridge in 1901. The modernization of the Ottoman Empire in the 19th century started with the military. In 1826 Sultan Mahmud II abolished the Janissary Corps and established the modern Ottoman army. He named them as the Nizam-seeded New Order. The Ottoman army was also the first institution to hire foreign experts and send its officers for training in Western European countries. Consequently, the Young Turks movement began when thus relatively young and newly trained men returned with their education. The Ottoman fleet in the Bosphorus near Ortaköy. The Ottoman navy vastly contributed to the expansion of the empire's territories on the European continent. It initiated the conquest of North Africa, with the addition of Algeria and Egypt to the Ottoman Empire in 1517. Starting with the loss of Greece in 1821 and Algeria in 1830, Ottoman naval power and control over the empire's distant overseas territories began to decline. Sultan Abdulaziz, reigned 1861-1876, attempted to re-establish a strong Ottoman navy, building the largest fleet after those of Britain and France. The shipyard at Barrow, England built its first submarine in 1886 for the Ottoman Empire. 197. However, the collapsing Ottoman economy could not sustain the fleet's strength for long. Sultan Abdülhamid I distrusted the admirals who sided with the reformist Miat Pasha and claimed that the large and expensive fleet was of no use against the Russians during the Russo-Turkish War. He locked most of the fleet inside Golden Horn, where the ships decayed for the next 30 years. Following the Young Turk Revolution in 1908, the Committee of Union and Progress sought to develop a strong Ottoman naval force. The Ottoman Navy Foundation was established in 1910 to buy new ships through public donations. Ottoman pilots in early 1912. The establishment of Ottoman military aviation dates back to between June 1909 and July 1911. 198, 199. The Ottoman Empire started preparing its first pilots and planes, and with the founding of Aviation School, Tayyar Mektebi, in Yeşilköy on the 3rd of July 1912, the empire began to tutor its own flight officers. The founding of Aviation School quickened advancement in the military aviation program, increased the number of enlisted persons within it, and gave the new pilots an active role in the Ottoman Army and Navy. In May 1913, the world's first specialized reconnaissance training program was started by the Aviation School, and the first separate reconnaissance division was established.